Welcome to Chapter 7. For 6 chapters, we've talked about organizations, their duties, their contracts, their security. Today, the perspective flips. The individual steps forward and starts making demands, and the law stands firmly behind them. Here's what we'll cover. We begin with the right of access under Article 15, the gateway right that lets people see what data you hold about them, and often the first move in any dispute. We'll get practical about timeframes, the 1 month deadline, when you can extend, what identity checks are proportionate, and how to handle unfounded or excessive requests. Then, the EDPB's guidance on access, which answers the questions the article itself leaves open. From there, the right to rectification, correcting inaccurate data, and the connected duty to notify recipients of corrections and deletions. The centerpiece follows the right to erasure, famously known as the right to be forgotten, with its grounds and its important exceptions. And we finish with two rights that work as pressure valves: restriction of processing and the right to object. Here's why this chapter matters beyond the exam. Rights requests are where compliance becomes visible to real people. Handle them well, and you build trust. Handle them badly, and you've written the first paragraph of a regulator's complaint file. Let's learn to handle them well. Let's start with the right I call the gateway, because it opens the door to every other right. How can you correct data you've never seen or erase data you don't know exists? Access comes first. Article 15 gives every individual two things. First, confirmation. Is my data being processed at all? Yes or no? Second, if yes, access to that data along with a package of supporting information. And that package is generous. The purposes of processing, the categories of data, the recipients or categories of recipients, the retention period or the criteria used to set it, the source of the data if it wasn't collected from them, the existence of their other rights, their right to complain to a supervisory authority, and whether automated decision-making is happening, including meaningful information about the logic involved. Think of it as a bank statement for your data. Not just the balance, but every transaction, who touched it and why. Cost matters too. The first copy is free. Only for additional copies can a controller charge a reasonable administrative fee. And there's a boundary worth remembering. Access must not adversely affect the rights and freedoms of others. If your access request would expose someone else's personal data, say emails mentioning a colleague, the controller must balance and often redact. Here's the real-world texture. Access requests spike during disputes. An employee heading to tribunal, a customer in a billing fight. The request is lawful regardless of motive, and as we'll see, you can't demand a reason. Treat every request as if a regulator will one day read your response. Sometimes they will. Now the operational mechanics. Because access requests live and die by deadlines and process, let me walk you through how a request should flow. The clock. Respond without undue delay and at the latest within 1 month of receipt. Note, receipt, not the day it eventually reaches the privacy team after sitting in a shared inbox. That's why staff training matters. A request emailed to a store manager or tweeted at your support account still counts. Everyone customer-facing should recognize a rights request on site. Extensions exist, but they're conditional. For complex or numerous requests, you may extend by 2 further months, but you must inform the individual within the first month, explaining why. An extension declared on day 35 is a violation, not an extension. Identity verification, a genuine dilemma. Verify too little and you might hand someone's data to a fraudster, itself a breach. Verify too much and you're obstructing rights. The standard is proportionality. Ask only for what's needed to confirm identity. If they contact you from the registered email about their own account, demanding a passport copy is usually excessive. Now the safety valve. For manifestly unfounded or excessive requests, particularly repetitive ones, you may charge a reasonable fee or refuse. But hear the warning in the word manifestly. This is a high bar, and the burden of proving it sits on you, the controller. An employee's third identical request this month might qualify. An inconvenient or hostile request does not. When in doubt, comply. Refusal is the exception you'll have to defend. The article gives us the skeleton, but the EDPB's guidelines on access provide the muscle, the answers to questions real requests raise. Let me share the ones that matter most. First, no motive test. Controllers cannot ask why someone wants their data and cannot refuse because the purpose seems litigious or awkward. I've watched managers bristle at this. They're only asking to build a case against us. Perhaps irrelevant. The right is unconditional, and demanding justification is itself non-compliance. Second, interpret requests broadly. A request for my data means all of it, unless the person narrows the scope themselves. That said, the EDPB blesses a practical approach. For individuals with long histories, you may ask them to specify what they're most interested in, as long as it's an offer to help, not a hurdle to jump. Third, search properly. All my data means searching across systems, email archives, CRM platforms, and yes, backups and unstructured data, proportionately. The effort should match your organization's size and means. A multinational claiming it cannot search its own email system will meet regulatory skepticism. Fourth, deliver usefully. Responses must be concise, transparent, and easily accessible. A layered response works well. A clear summary letter upfront, full data attached behind it. Dumping 10,000 raw log rows on someone technically provides data while practically hiding it. The EDPB sees through that. Finally, if you refuse anything, explain the reasons and inform the person of their right to complain to the supervisory authority and to seek a judicial remedy. Refusal without explanation converts a request into a complaint. Now, a right that sounds humble but carries real weight: rectification. Article 16 says individuals can obtain, without undue delay, the correction of inaccurate personal data and the completion of incomplete data, including by providing a supplementary statement. Why does something so simple matter so much? Because data drives decisions, and wrong data drives wrong decisions. Let me give you the classic scenario. A credit reference agency holds a record saying you defaulted on a loan. You didn't. It was a reporting error. That single wrong field can block your mortgage, raise your insurance premiums, even affect job screening. Rectification is the legal lever that fixes not just the record but the life consequences flowing from it. This right is the accuracy principle from Article 5, handed to the individual as a tool. The mechanics mirror access. 1 month deadline, extendable for complexity with notice. Verify the requester's identity proportionately. Now the nuanced part, disputes. What if the individual says the record is wrong and you believe it's right? Suppose a doctor's professional opinion in a medical file. The patient disagrees with the diagnosis. Opinions aren't inaccurate merely because someone dislikes them, but the file should reflect the disagreement, and that's where the supplementary statement shines. The patient's objection sits alongside the record. And while accuracy is being verified, remember the individual can invoke restriction of processing, which we'll meet shortly, pausing use of the contested data. One habit to build in your organization: when data is corrected, trace where it flowed. Because as the next slide shows, fixing your copy is only half the job. Here's a short article with long consequences. Article 19. It says, when you rectify, erase, or restrict data, you must communicate that action to each recipient to whom the data was disclosed, unless this proves impossible or involves disproportionate effort. And if the individual asks, you must tell them who those recipients are. Why does this exist? Think it through with me. You correct a wrong address in your system. Wonderful. But last quarter, you shared your customer file with a delivery partner, a marketing agency, and a debt collector. Your database is now clean, theirs still carry the error. Without Article 19, corrections would be cosmetic. The mistake would live on downstream, resurfacing months later like a weed you only trimmed. Rectification and erasure are supposed to ripple outward, and this article is the ripple mechanism. The practical prerequisite is unglamorous but essential: recipient logging. You can only notify recipients you can identify. This is where your Article 30 records of processing and disclosure logs earn their keep. Organizations that track data flows can execute Article 19 in an afternoon. Organizations that don't face an archaeology project. About the exceptions: impossible or disproportionate effort. These are real but narrow. Notifying 3 business partners is never disproportionate. Notifying recipients of a public dataset republished across the internet might genuinely be. Document your reasoning either way. That's accountability thinking by now, right? Here's the scenario that makes it concrete. A bank corrects a customer's wrongly recorded missed payment. Under Article 19, it must also inform the credit bureaus it reported to, and the customer can demand to know exactly which bureaus received it. The correction chases the error wherever it went. That's the design, and it's rather elegant. Now for the most famous data subject right of all: erasure. Known worldwide as the right to be forgotten. Famous and widely misunderstood. So let's get it precisely right. First, the misunderstanding to kill immediately. This is not an absolute right to vanish. You cannot simply demand deletion of everything, everywhere, always. Article 17 works on grounds, and it's balanced by exceptions. The grounds. Erasure applies when the data is no longer necessary for its original purpose, when the individual withdraws consent and no other basis exists, when they object under Article 21 and no overriding grounds remain, when the processing was unlawful, when erasure is required by a legal obligation, and, notably, when data was collected from a child in the context of online services, a ground reflecting that children shouldn't be haunted forever by what they shared at 13. Then the exceptions, and they are substantial. Freedom of expression and information. A newspaper archive doesn't get scrubbed because coverage was unflattering. Compliance with legal obligations. Your bank cannot delete transaction records. Tax law forces it to keep, no matter how politely you ask. Public health. Archiving and research with safeguards, and the establishment or defense of legal claims. There's also a clever extension for the internet age. If a controller made the data public and erasure applies, it must take reasonable steps considering cost and technology to inform other controllers processing that data that erasure was requested, links, copies, replications included. The professional skill here is balancing. Every erasure request is a small weighing exercise, ground versus exception. Practice that reflects, the exam tests it, and so does real life. Let me introduce the most underrated right in the GDPR: restriction of processing. If erasure is deleting the file, restriction is putting it in a sealed box, still stored but frozen. Nobody uses it, nobody shares it, it just waits. When does someone get to demand this pause? Article 18 gives 4 grounds, and notice how each is a situation in limbo. First, accuracy is contested. Processing pauses while you verify who's right. Second, the processing is unlawful, but the individual prefers restriction over erasure. Perhaps they want the evidence preserved. Third, you no longer need the data, but they need it maintained for legal claims. Fourth, they've objected under Article 21 and the balancing of interests is still pending. See the pattern? Restriction is the interim remedy, the handbrake pulled while a dispute resolves. And that's exactly why individuals in conflicts love it. Erasure destroys, access reveals, but restriction preserves the status quo, which is often precisely what a person heading to litigation wants. While data is restricted, what can you still do with it? Very little. Store it? Yes. Beyond that, process it only with the individual's consent, or for legal claims, or to protect another person's rights, or for important public interest. Practically, organizations implement this by flagging records, moving data to a quarantine system, or locking access, whatever technically ensures the freeze is real. Two housekeeping duties complete the picture. Before lifting a restriction, you must inform the individual. And remember Article 19 from earlier? Restrictions get communicated to recipients too. Picture the employee disputing the accuracy of a disciplinary record while their case proceeds. Restriction keeps that record out of active use until truth is established. A quiet right doing important work. We close this chapter with the right to object, and I want you to see its two very different faces, because the exam absolutely will test whether you can tell them apart. Phase 1, the conditional objection. When processing rests on legitimate interests or on a task in the public interest, the individual may object on grounds relating to their particular situation. Note that phrase, it means the objection is personal. Something about their circumstances makes this processing especially harmful or intrusive for them. What happens next is a rebalancing. The controller must stop unless it demonstrates compelling legitimate grounds that override the individual's interests, rights, and freedoms, or the data is needed for legal claims. So the burden flips onto the controller, and compelling is a demanding word. It's a genuine contest, and sometimes the controller legitimately wins. Phase 2, the absolute objection. And here there is no contest at all. When personal data is processed for direct marketing, including any profiling connected to it, the individual may object at any time, and processing for that purpose must simply stop. No balancing, no compelling grounds, no fee, no delay. Think of every unsubscribe link you've ever clicked. That's Article 21 working. And a practical note from the trenches: honor it with suppression lists. Deleting someone entirely can backfire. They get re-added by the next data import. Suppression remembers never to market to this person. Two final requirements often missed. The right must be explicitly brought to the individual's attention, clearly and separately from other information, at the latest at first communication. Burying it in paragraph 9 of a policy fails. And for online services, objection must be possible by automated means, a click, not a posted letter. Super progress. Chapter 7 complete, and you now command the first family of data subject rights: access and its mechanics, rectification, the notification ripple to recipients, erasure with its grounds and exceptions, restriction as the pause button, and objection with its two faces. When a rights request lands on your desk someday, you'll know exactly which lever the person is pulling and what the law expects of you. Quick pause for the essentials. If this playlist is moving your preparation forward, subscribe to the channel. One click gives you this full series plus every other certification playlist we publish, and it genuinely fuels more free training like this. Stay with the designed order too. Chapter 8 completes the rights picture with consent, automated decision-making, portability, and the limits on rights, and it references today's material constantly. The two chapters are really one story told in two sittings. And when you're ready to test yourself properly, our complete CIPP/E course on Udemy adds the assessment layer, chapter quizzes, full-length practice exams that feel like the real thing, role-play scenarios such as handling a hostile access request, and downloadable toolkits for revision on the go. Understanding plus practice equals a pass, and the practice half lives there. Link in the description below. Take 5 minutes, maybe recall the 4 grounds for restriction from memory as a self-test, and then join me in Chapter 8. The rights story concludes there. See you in a moment.